The summer of 1874 pressed down on the Missouri plains like a smothering hand, and Clara Whitmore felt every ounce of its weight. The fields that once fed the town now lay brittle and gray, beaten flat by the relentless sun. Dust clung to every surface, the porch railings, the empty corn rows, even the window sills inside the farmhouse where she had grown up. It hung heavy in the air like a prophecy of ruin. 19-year-old Clara, broad-hipped, full-chested, and dark-skinned as the river Earth, moved through the house with a quiet heaviness. Where she once had been teased for her size, she now carried it like a shield, a reminder she had survived what the land and fate had tried to claim. Her father's voice no longer echoed through the rooms. The fever had taken him, just as it had taken the neighbors and the little children whose graves now dotted the hill behind the church. With him had gone the last anchor to the life she understood. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway staring at the cracked teacup her father had once insisted she keep for special days. She touched its rim gently. There had been no special days since he passed, only silence, debt, and the knowledge that nothing tied her to this land anymore except memories and hunger. Her Aunt Miriam burst into the kitchen with a purposeful sweep of her skirts, the scent of St. Louis still clinging to her clothes. Soap, perfume, and a kind of brisk confidence Clara had never possessed. Miriam flapped a church bulletin at her face, fanning herself dramatically, despite the slight breeze slipping through the door. "This won't do," Miriam declared, her voice slicing the quiet. "A girl alone on a dying farm. Men will have your land, your father's things, your very safety. Practicality must guide us now." Clara pressed her lips together, bracing. Miriam unfolded a crisp newspaper and smoothed it across the table. "There's a solution, and will not pretend otherwise. The Matrimonial Gazette. Settlers out west looking for brides. They pay your fare, provide a home, and you, child, are in no position to refuse security." Her stomach tightened, but she stepped closer. The paper smelled of ink and hope, dangerous things for a girl with nothing left. Miriam tapped a particular column with her bony finger. "Here. A man named Samuel Crow, from the Arizona Territory, 30 years old, honest, God-fearing, looking for a wife to help build a ranch. Sounds steady, not like the drifters haunting Missouri roads these days." Clara read the blocky letters slowly, her pulse stumbling. It felt absurd that her future, her marriage, could be contained in a few inches of print. "You'll write him," Miriam said, not as a suggestion, but as an inevitability. Clara swallowed. What if he doesn't want? He advertised, he'll want. But Clara wasn't thinking of being wanted. She was thinking of stepping on a train with no family, no tether, no guarantees. She was thinking of becoming a stranger's wife because the world had given her no other choice. Still, that night, by lamplight, she wrote to him. She held the pen carefully, her handwriting neat even though her pulse shook. She wrote of faith, of willingness, of the hope, small and trembling, that she could be of use to someone. She didn't mention loneliness or fear, or the way she felt like a ghost in her own home since her father's death. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived addressed in a firm masculine script. Inside were 2 train tickets, a silver ring simple as a sunrise, and a short note. "Miss Whitmore, your letter moved me. If you choose to come, I will provide for you and treat you with respect. I await your arrival in San Miguel. Samuel Crow." Clara stared at the ring, the metal cool against her palm. She had expected hesitation. Instead, she had received certainty, a certainty she was not sure she shared. Still, she packed a small carpet bag, her father's Bible, 2 dresses, the teacup, and the ring she tucked carefully into its nest of cloth. On the morning she left Missouri, the train station buzzed with the murmurs of townsfolk who watched her with a mix of curiosity and pity. They saw only a big black girl with soft arms and sad eyes, heading west on a promise no one understood. The train whistle shrieked like a warning. Clara felt the sound slice through her ribs. "Westward," the conductor called. With a breath that felt like a farewell, she stepped onto the train. The journey was long, rattling through a world that changed color by the mile. Green fields gave way to pale clay, then to endless stretches of red rock and bone-white sky. Passengers eyed her, some with judgment, some with speculation. But Clara held her Bible and the letter like a shield. She imagined her future husband as the photograph suggested, a white man with a wide hat and a shadowed smile, a rancher, a settler, a steady presence in a land that looked anything but steady. But when the train hissed to a stop at San Miguel, and the dust swirled around her feet, no hat-wearing man stepped forward. Instead, the sheriff approached, hat in hand and eyes uneasy. "You Miss Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes." "There's a man waiting outside town for you." He hesitated. "Calls himself Samuel Crow." Her chest fluttered with relief until the sheriff added quietly, "He ain't what most folks around here call a settler." Her pulse stumbled. "What is he then?" The sheriff shifted. "You'll see." And with that, the path she thought she knew dissolved beneath her feet.
The wagon rolled across the desert like a lone beetle fighting the wind, and Clara Whitmore sat hunched on the wooden seat, gripping her carpetbag as if it were the last piece of herself she still controlled. The Apache boy who drove said little, and the land itself seemed to speak louder than any human could. The air shimmered with heat. Great mesas loomed like red giants carved by hands older than memory. Cacti stood like sentinels. The sun bleached the world into a palette of fire. Clara felt smaller with every mile, small despite the fullness of her figure, small despite the strength she'd had to gather to leave Missouri behind. The desert was vast, merciless, unconcerned with the worries of a black girl who had been pushed westward by hunger, death, and an advertisement in a matrimonial gazette. When the boy finally pulled the wagon to a stop at the edge of a valley crowded with lodges and smoke, Clara's breath hitched. She stared at the circle of shelters, earth, hides, reeds, nothing like the whitewashed houses she'd known. Men moved among them with bows and painted shields. Women tended fires and ground maize. Children darted like sparks through the dust. This can't be right," Clara whispered, her throat tight. "This isn't a ranch." The boy only pointed. "Nantan Lobo waits." Before Clara could muster protest, a figure stepped forward from the center of the camp. A tall man, broad-shouldered, long hair bound with copper beads. A scar cut down one side of his face, sharp as a drawn blade. Yet his eyes held a calm, storm-gray steadiness that made her heart stall. He stopped before her, posture neither threatening nor submissive. "You are Clara Whitmore," he said, not as a question, but as a certainty. Clara swallowed hard. Her voice felt trapped in her throat. I came to marry Samuel Crow." For a moment, he simply studied her. Then he dipped his head once. "That is my name among your people." Her blood ran cold. You... She stepped back, stumbling on loose sand. "You deceived me. You let me believe—" "That I was white?" His tone held no mockery, only a weary acceptance. "The interpreter wrote those letters. The settlers would not trust a union with my people unless the words were softened." Her breath grew jagged. Betrayal pressed into her ribs like iron. "I was to marry a settler, a rancher, a safe man." "I am a safe man, or I would not have asked for peace." Peace. The word felt wrong in the shadow of warriors and fire pits. Clara's voice cracked. You tricked me into a treaty marriage." "You can choose," he said calmly. "If you refuse, the treaty fails. Bloodshed will follow, not just for my people, for yours. But I will not force a wife who does not wish to be here." The honesty in his voice shook her more than deception had. Men gathered around. Women looked on. The sheriff and 2 settlers stood to the side, stiff and uncomfortable, waiting as if for judgment. Clara realized with a sinking dread that this wedding had been planned, sanctioned, and witnessed before she'd even arrived. Her decision was already written into other men's plans, but her life was still hers. Clara lifted her chin, tears burning hot but unshed. "If I refuse, will you let me leave safely?" "Yes." "Will they?" She gestured to the gathered warriors. His gaze didn't waver. "They follow me." Something in his tone, quiet, unshakable, felt truer than anything she'd heard since leaving Missouri. Her heart pounded. She had no home to return to, no family waiting, no land, no money, no future. The train that had brought her here had also burned every bridge behind her. And this man, this Apache chief, offered her respect, at least, offered protection, offered, she realized with a hard swallow, a choice. The word echoed in her skull until she couldn't ignore it. Choice. She nodded stiffly. If I marry you, I expect to be treated with dignity." "You shall," he said, bowing his head. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything she had imagined. No lace veil, no church bells, no pastor's homily. The elders spoke words in their tongue, low, fluid syllables that rose like smoke. Clara stood rigid beside Nantan, her hands trembling, her dress dusty and clinging from sweat. The sheriff muttered a few legal words to make the union valid in the town's eyes. And then it was done. A wife, a stranger, a symbol. When the people dispersed, Nantan placed a hand lightly over his heart. "From this day you are called White Dove among my people." Clara flinched at the intimacy of the name. I still don't understand this," she admitted. "You will," he said softly, "in time." That night she sat alone outside the lodge they gave her, a small fire crackling at her feet. The desert sky unfurled above her, wide, merciless, breathtaking. She wanted to cry, to scream, to pray, but only silence came. Nantan approached without sound, carrying a wrapped bundle. "This is for you," he said, setting it beside her. Clara hesitated. "What is it?" "A wedding gift." His voice held a strange tenderness. "Open it only when the time is right. You will know." He stepped back into the shadows, leaving her alone with the fire and the mysterious wooden box. Clara lifted it gingerly. It was heavier than she expected, and inside, she sensed, lay something that would change everything. Again.
For weeks after the wedding, Clara Whitmore moved through the Apache camp like someone learning the steps of a new dance. Awkward, uncertain, but determined not to falter. The women taught her how to grind maize until her arms ached. The children followed her with shy fascination, and the men watched her with the wary curiosity reserved for anything new that might shape their future. She had grown leaner from work and sun, though she remained broad-hipped and full-bodied, a presence that filled any space she entered. But now there was strength in her stance, in the way she carried baskets, in the way she spoke. Her fear had not vanished, but it had learned to bow its head. Nantan Lobo, her husband, moved around her with respectful distance. He never raised his voice, never touched her without permission, and never allowed others to belittle her. He was a silent guardian, a storm contained behind calm eyes. Their marriage was still a brittle new thing, fragile as sun-dried clay, but Clara could not deny the faint thread of trust forming between them. Yet outside the camp, the world sharpened like a blade. Rumors trickled from San Miguel about stolen cattle, broken fences, raids in the night. Ranchers blamed the Apache without proof. Travelers whispered threats. Hatred, Clara realized, needed no evidence, only a direction. One evening, after Nantan returned from a tense visit to the trading post, he sought her out by the river where she washed today's dust from her arms. "Pack what you need," he said quietly. "We may have to leave soon." Clara straightened, droplets shimmering on her dark skin. "Why?" "Settlers say we stole their cattle. They want blood." His jaw tightened. "When fear speaks, reason dies." Clara remembered Missouri, remembered mobs that judged her father's parishioners by color, not truth. She felt that familiar ache, anger, helplessness, grief. "Can't you speak with them? They trust you. You trade with them." "Trust dies quicker than crops in drought," he murmured. A shiver crawled down Clara's spine. That night, as she lay on her woven mat, the drums outside pulsed like a heartbeat she could not control. She could not sleep. She thought of home, the church roof in the rain, her father's warm baritone reading psalms, and the gentle familiarity of a place that no longer existed. She clutched the wooden wedding box Nantan had given her, still unopened, still mysterious. Then the world shattered. A scream ripped through the night, followed by a burst of flame. Clara bolted upright. Outside, the sky glowed orange as torches sliced the darkness. Horses thundered through the camp. Men shouted. Women cried out in terror. Clara ran outside just as masked riders stormed between the lodges and set them ablaze. Smoke rolled like a living creature, thick and choking. A figure on horseback swung a torch toward the lodge beside hers, flames exploding across its roof. "Nantan!" she cried, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Before she could run, a hand yanked her backward. She slammed into the dirt, blinking through smoke. It was the old woman who had once called her brave. "No, white dove," she hissed. "If you die, hope dies too." Through the cracks between burning lodges, Clara saw Nantan. He fought with terrifying precision, rifle stock swinging, blade glinting, movements sharp as lightning. But 3 outlaws circled him, one smashing a rifle butt against his skull. Clara screamed as he fell, blood streaking his face. They bound him brutally, dragging him toward their horses. "Stop!" she sobbed, lunging forward, but the old woman clamped her arm around Clara's chest, pulling her back. Clara's heart split. She watched, helpless, as Nantan was hauled away like a trophy. The moment he disappeared into the darkness, something inside her broke. She ran. She fled the burning camp with only her satchel and the wooden box pressed against her chest. Sand tore at her feet, branches scratched her arms, and her lungs burned with smoke and terror. She didn't stop until the first light of dawn spilled across the desert. She collapsed beneath the sandstone arch, her body trembling. The mare, her horse, stood nearby shaking, eyes wide. Clara clutched the wooden box, her tears carving tracks through soot. "Nantan," she whispered hoarsely, "please, God, don't let that be the end." The sun rose merciless and bright, painting the desert in gold and blood. Clara wiped her face, rage burning through her grief. "I won't lose you," she vowed into the wind. "Not like this." Her gaze hardened. She stood. The world had underestimated her once. It would not do so again. She mounted her horse sore and shaking, tied the wooden box to her satchel, and turned her face toward the horizon where Nantan had been taken. She would ride until her body broke if she had to. She would hunt every outlaw between here and the Mexican border. She would fight the world itself if it meant bringing him home. Clara Whitmore,
just 19 and carrying more determination than fear, kicked her horse into a gallop. The desert's harsh song swallowed her as she rode, and the box at her side, unopened, heavy with mystery, waited for her heart to be ready.
Clara rode as if the earth itself urged her forward. The desert wind tore through her hair. Dust stung her arms, and each hoofbeat hammered her determination into something fierce and unbreakable. She followed the faint tracks left by the outlaws, drag marks, hoofprints, and the occasional dark smear that made her chest tighten with dread. By noon, the heat pressed down like a punishment, shimmering across the sand in blistering waves. But Clara did not slow. She had lived through worse than thirst, worse than sun. She had lived through death, forced marriage, and loneliness that felt like a physical wound. She would live through this, too. When the column of smoke appeared in the distance, thin, black, rising in a steady curl, she steered her horse toward it. Her breath tightened. A campfire, maybe, or the outlaws celebrating their capture. As she crested a ridge, she looked down and saw them. 5 men lounged around a fire, drinking from tin mugs. Their horses grazed nearby, and tied to a post at the camp's edge, beaten and barely conscious, was Nantan Lobo, her husband. Her breath trembled as she dismounted, crouching behind a boulder. Rage and terror battled in her chest. Nantan's face was streaked with blood, his long hair matted with dust. Yet even bound, even slumped in exhaustion, he held his posture with the stubborn dignity she had come to recognize. One outlaw kicked dirt at him. Filthy savage. He'll fetch a good price, dead or alive. Clara's vision blurred with fury. She looked down at the wooden box tied to her satchel, the same one Nantan had given her on their wedding night. Her hands moved on instinct. She untied the cord and lifted the lid for the first time. Inside lay a folded sash, crimson and gold, and a letter written in 2 languages. Her heart lurched. The sash was beautiful, not delicate, but strong, woven thick with meaning, a wife's mark, a symbol of belonging. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the letter. Clara, if ever you open this, it means the path has tested your heart. You are free, free to return to your world if you wish, free to stay if you choose. I would never bind you in chains of duty. This cloth is worn only by a woman who chooses her husband, not by fear, not by need, but by love. If you do not feel this for me, burn it and walk where your heart calls. Nantan Lobo, Samuel Crow. Her heart lurched. The sash was beautiful, not delicate but strong, woven thick with meaning, a wife's mark, a symbol of belonging. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the letter. Clara, if ever you open this, it means the path has tested your heart. You are free, free to return to your world if you wish, free to stay if you choose. I would never bind you in chains of duty. This cloth is worn only by a woman who chooses her husband not by fear, not by need, but by love. If you do not feel this for me, burn it and walk where your heart calls. Nantan Lobo, Samuel Crow. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. He had freed her from the beginning. He had never trapped her, never planned to use her. She had misread him because life had taught her that promises from men were shackles, not gifts. A sob escaped her, quiet, raw, real. You foolish, noble man, she whispered. Her decision was sudden and clear. She wrapped the crimson sash across her shoulder, tying it firmly. The cloth glowed against her dark skin like flame on midnight. She wiped her face, steadied her breathing, and rose. I'm coming for you, she murmured. She mounted her horse and rode down the slope in a blur of determination. The first outlaw saw her too late.
She charged straight into their camp with a scream that tore across the canyon. The sudden chaos sent their horses rearing. One outlaw stumbled backward in shock. Clara snatched the rifle from his startled hands and swung the butt into his jaw, sending him crashing into the dirt. Nantan looked up, dazed. Clara? But she was already moving. Another outlaw raised his gun. Clara kicked her mare sharply. The horse lunged, knocking him flat. She scooped his fallen knife and slid off the saddle, sprinting toward Nantan. "Hold on," she gasped, sawing at the ropes with shaking hands. Gunshots cracked behind her. She flinched but didn't stop. The ropes finally snapped. Nantan collapsed forward into her arms. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, voice shredded with pain. "You're my husband," she shot back. "Where you go, I go." Before he could respond, a shout echoed across the ridge, a war cry that made Clara's blood surge. Apache riders descended from the cliffs like a storm. Leading them was Tosa, Nantan's brother, bow drawn, eyes blazing. Arrows whistled, the outlaws scrambled, shouting in terror. Within minutes, the battle was over. The canyon fell silent except for the crackle of the dying fire. Tosa leapt from his horse and clasped Nantan's shoulder. "Brother, you live." Then he turned to Clara, his gaze sweeping over the sash across her chest. "You wear the colors," he said in awe. "You chose." Clara stood tall despite her shaking legs. "Yes." Nantan's eyes softened, dark, depthless, full of something she had never seen from a man directed at her before. Reverence. Exhausted, Clara sagged against him. He wrapped his arm around her, steadying her. When night fell and the canyon glowed with embers, they sat side by side under the stars. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, the sash warm across her skin. She spoke softly. "Your gift wasn't a trap, it was freedom." "Yes," he murmured, "and I used that freedom to choose you." His breath trembled. "You silenced the whole town when you stood with me, but tonight you silenced me." Clara smiled, small and weary and full of love. "Then we are even." And for the first time, the desert night felt like home.
Spring seeped quietly into the desert, not with the lush green Clara remembered from Missouri, but with shy blossoms clinging to cactus spines and the soft scent of rain carried on the wind. The valley, scarred by fire and battle, had begun to knit itself back together, just as the people living within it had. Clara walked through the camp each morning with a bucket swinging at her side, the crimson and gold sash draped proudly over her shoulder. It had become part of her daily attire, not just a symbol of marriage, but a mark of her place in this land. Women who once eyed her with caution now greeted her with familiarity. Men nodded with respect. Children raced up to her, tugging at her skirt, eager for stories or English words. She had become something she never imagined, a bridge, a presence, a wife not bound by duty, but by choice. And Nantan Lobo, her husband, moved through the camp with restored strength, though his shoulder still bore the memory of the outlaw's blow. When he looked at Clara, his expression carried a depth, quiet but unmistakable. Their bond, once fragile as thin glass, had grown into something solid. Peace, however, remained precarious. News drifted from San Miguel like cautious footsteps. The story of the black woman who had ridden into a gunfight to rescue an Apache chief spread through the town faster than wildfire in dry grass. Some called her foolish, others called her brave, but all spoke of her. And the legend softened hearts that had been hardened by ignorance and fear. The sheriff himself rode into the camp one spring morning, hat in hand, boots coated in dust. When Clara was helping the elders weave baskets, he approached Nantan with a sheepish look. "Crew," the sheriff said, clearing his throat, "the ranchers want new trade terms, fairer ones, and safe passage agreements. I reckon It's high time this fight ended." The murmurs that rippled through the camp held disbelief and hope. Nantan regarded the sheriff steadily. "No blood for blood," he said. "That must be the first term." "Aye," the sheriff agreed. "I'll hold the town to it." When he said goodbye, he tipped his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, you done more for this territory than you know." Clara bowed her head politely, though warmth bloomed in her chest. That evening, the tribe lit fires in a wide celebratory circle, flames dancing against the canyon walls like bright spirits. White settlers and Apache families shared roasted maize and venison. Children ran freely between the two groups. Elders traded stories. Even the once hardened ranchers leaned back and laughed with people they had feared only months before. Clara watched the scene unfold with amazement. Never in her life had she seen two worlds touch so gently. Before the last rays of sunlight faded, Nantan stood. His presence quieted the crowd. He reached for Clara's hand and led her into the glow of the firelight. She felt every gaze settle upon them, expectant, curious, reverent. Nantan raised his voice, measured and strong. "Once I took a wife for the sake of peace. I believed duty was the strongest bond a man could offer. I did not know how wrong I was." Clara's breath caught. The fire painted his face in warm gold, highlighting the scar that ran across his cheek, the one that she had come to find dignified rather than intimidating. "This woman," he continued, turning toward her, "taught me that love asks not for duty, but for choice. She crossed worlds to save me. She faced death and hatred, not for treaty, not for tribe, but for truth." The silence in the circle grew heavy with emotion. "Clara Whitmore," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "White dove who rides with fire. Will you stand with me again, not as the wife of a treaty, but as the wife of my choosing and of your own?" Clara felt tears sting her eyes. For a moment the world blurred, turning into a swirl of firelight, faces, and desert wind. She remembered her father's small Missouri church, the train platform she stepped onto alone, the first terrifying night in the Apache camp, the raid, the rescue, the moment she chose him. She stepped forward. "I will," she whispered. A cheer rose like thunder. Even the sheriff wiped at his eyes. Nantan lifted a pendant, silver shaped into a bird, wings spread wide, and placed it gently against her chest. "This," he said, "was the lock to your wedding box. I melted it and shaped it with my own hands. Let it remind you that no lock will ever keep your heart bound, not by me, not by anyone." Clara pressed the pendant with trembling fingers. It was warm, warm from his hands, warm with meaning. When the crowd dispersed into music and laughter, Nantan and Clara slipped away to the cliff overlooking the valley. Stars speckled the sky like powdered silver. "Do you ever regret writing that letter?" she asked softly. He laughed low and warm. "Only that I did not write it sooner." She leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the night settle around them. The world below was quiet, peaceful, alive with possibility. Clara had once thought she was being dragged into a fate she never wanted, but the truth now sat steady in her heart. She had been led, not forced, into a destiny she was meant to claim. And as the wind whispered across the desert, carrying the scent of rain and fire and new beginnings, Clara Whitmore knew the covenant she and Nantan forged would echo long after their footsteps faded. A covenant built on choice, on courage, on a gift that had silenced the whole town.